Before we start, for people who are new to us and what we do, I just wanted to explain the context for this webinar. Webinars are not our main business, but they're one of the ways in which we communicate both with clients and with people who haven't used this yet. But really, I suppose one way of saying what we do is to say that we're in the energy business. And, well, energy and time. And what we do is we install devices, social devices in organizations that help people to make things happen, specifically real conversations. What this technology does is that people get when they're with us, it enables them to have conversations that change things, that actually stop them doing the sort of futile activity that so many people so many of us, and so often when things aren't going well, when we can't talk to the people that we need to talk to, we need to have conversations that change things, that moves things on, that get decisions made, that get commitment, and that enable us to actually move things on. And that's what we do. We get things moving. We get things moving so that people can produce, can do what they're supposed to do when they're at work. And so I thought I'd explain that because it's good context for what we're doing this morning, which is talking about having certain kinds of conversations which actually move things on. In this specific instance, with our bosses. Now, I was running a big session at a company secretaries conference a few weeks ago. And one of the things that we were covering is how to have difficult conversations, but specifically with people who are more senior than us. And there was quite a lot left over to say, and I thought I'd create a webinar both for the company secretaries, and I think we've got a few here this morning, so welcome to you especially, but also because I thought it was a really interesting topic in general which people would like to hear more about and to discuss. So of course we all have people who depend on us. We might call them stakeholders. Some of us have shareholders, and of course, we all have a boss. These are people who we need to influence sometimes. So if we don't have the biggest voice or the highest rank, how do we engineer, how do we get ourselves the mandate to do something, the go-ahead? How do we persuade the boss to do something that they didn't wake up wanting to do that day? Okay. So I'm going to go through this basically 4 things, I think, and I'm going to go through it fairly quickly this morning. I'm going to throw a lot of things at you. Now, this is not normally how we work with people, so people who've done projects with this, you'll know, we entirely depend on people to think for themselves, and we encourage that. We give people an opportunity and a space to think and discuss and come out with new strategies. So what I'm firing at you today is a whole load of ideas. These are outputs from previous projects, from my experience, from psychology, which I think you'll find useful. And my ambition is that you are able to take just one thing away from what you've heard this morning. So I'm going to give you about 35 minutes, 30 minutes of material, then a Q&A at the end. And if we have to come back to injury time at 10:15, so be it. That's what we'll do. I'm going to ask you through a poll where you are right now. So the question is, I have a successful routine for getting my boss to pay attention to my input. And here are the results. So most of you, or many of you, have somewhere to go, something that you kind of a routine that you use. About 26%, very even actually, 26% often manage to figure something out, presumably on the fly somewhat, and almost a quarter of you have a strategy that works much of the time. It would be very interesting to see how that strategy changes as we go along, or it might be that you and I are already thinking very similar things already, and it'll be interesting to compare where you are now to where we end up with it. But that 9% I think is interesting, and that's what I'm really wanting to shift this morning. Okay, so let's get cracking. The first thing that I want to talk about here is deciding what you want. So in general, big influences, by which I mean spouses, partners, teenage children, and the occasional chairman or CEO, prefer to make up their own minds about what to do. Therefore, when we're starting a conversation to try and make something happen, to get their attention, talking in terms of outputs rather than inputs works a lot better. But let me do the inputs first. Let me give you some example of what this input language actually sounds like. So we're talking about the stuff here. Okay, firstly, this is one you might recognize. Go and put your shoes on. Oh, do I have to? So here's putting the outcome first. We're going to the zoo. Great, I'll go and put my shoes on. Okay, now that's maybe a silly home example, but I think it tells a tale. Here's another one. So here's again process or input first. I need you to sign off for a board admin software package, Mr. Chairman. They say, do we really need another software package? Okay, if I start with outcome, I want to make the routine for submitting board papers really easy for everyone. Oh, that sounds good. How? So we're getting a much more positive outcome, a much more positive reaction by talking about what's going to happen rather than on what we need them to do. So there exists, for me, a set of words that is associated with talking about input, with talking about process. And these words, I think, signal that we haven't really, maybe that we haven't really decided what we want, but what they say to everybody is hard work. This is going to be a drudge. This is going to be maybe futile or a waste of time. And here are some of these words now. So if I'm introducing a conversation, if I want to doom it to failure, I might ask to have a chat, to have a catch up. That's in very common usage these days. Can we have a catch up about blah blah? Now, of course, what that really means is I want to make something happen. Nobody just wants to talk these days. Nobody has the time, but that's how we phrase it. Another favorite word of mine is I'd like to discuss XYZ with you. I'd like you to consider, or I want us to consider. I want to have a little mull over. I'd like to revisit. All of these words are about doing a process, about the inputs. Not very interesting, not at all engaging. What we really want to focus people on is vocabulary associated with what's going to happen when we actually do this. And that's, I'd like to finalize XYZ. I want to get your buy-in for ABC. I want to try and persuade you about DAR. I want us to decide. I'd like to try and win you over too. So these words, although you could say, well, we're just talking semantics. Yes, semantics is important. It signals an intention. Now, at this stage, this is all in your head. We're trying to help you to figure out, how do I even have the conversation? And what I'm suggesting is that if you stick to the words, the output words, finalize, persuade, decide, bind, and win over, and stay away from discuss, chat, catch up, consider, revisit, mull over, and all that kind of stuff, you're going to set a tone and an intention in your own mind and in the other person's mind, which is going to increase your chances of getting what you want. Okay, so here's the next bit that I'd like you to think about. So this is about formulating a simple, powerful message. And people, in my experience, even really experienced people, get this wrong again and again. When I say get this wrong, they make some mistakes that weaken their chances. Now, some people can get through on personality alone, and that's fine. But I can't coach people to have a personality. However, what we do coach people to do, to consider, to think about, and to switch to, and specifically to experiment with, which is, I hope, going to be one output from this morning for you, is ways of getting a very tight message organized in their heads before they walk in the room. Okay, so here we go. What's this pyramid for? There's a particular approach. I did not invent this, but I think it's a very handy way of looking at it, which creates in our minds, in our preparation, a hierarchy. So what I'm suggesting you consider doing is to actually start with the punchline, with the most important thing that you need to lodge in their minds. What tends to happen is when we have a mission in our heads, we tend to give people a lot of this detail down here. Now, the detail might be absolutely fascinating to you, but to the person who actually needs to give you the okay, they don't need to know that stuff. They just need to have an idea that you know it. So the punchline, what you actually want out of it, has to come first. So how do you formulate that punchline? I'm going to come back to that in a second. This second bit is the rest, the bare facts of what they need to know. But that's the order that it happens in. If you want to give a little bit of this detail afterwards, that's fine. They will probably ask you for it. They may not. There's something in sales called a buying signal. I'm sure it's not a surprise to even non-sales people. Some people give us a buying signal. They say yes to us, and we don't hear it. We don't hear it, and then what we end up doing is giving them a whole load of stuff that they never needed, and ironically, we end up turning them off. So this is the really important one, and I want to tell you now what actually goes into this top pyramid. Okay, so the first bit here, so number one here is how I feel. In this case, it could be something positive or something negative. I'm worried. I'm keen. I'm very worried. I'm terrified. But we're trying to put a word in there that describes where we are. I'm nervous. Okay, here we go. Now, the next thing is, what about? Now here we're saying what the whole point of this conversation is. I'm worried about board papers coming in late. And this is the next important bit. What do I want to do about it? I want to install a system to make it work well. And then any kind of detail that you need. So that is the basic minimum of what's in there, of the message, the crux of the message. So how I feel, what about, why, and then what I want. Okay, now here's the peril with the detail. If you say those things, how I feel, what about, why, and then what I want, if you then carry on adding a whole load of detail, this is where it'll start to unpack for you. And I want to show you a little bit of something about primacy and recency effect. Now, if you think about this graph here, is people's ability to remember. Early on, if you think of time along the bottom here, early on, people will remember a lot. If this is 100%, now people are never going to remember 100%, but even if this is just, let's call this 1 minute, they'll remember a lot about what you say here, maybe as much as 90%. But as the seconds tick on, they'll remember less and less. And right at the end, again, they'll remember what's going on here. So this whole bit here, whatever you put in here, is highly likely to be forgotten. And so whatever we put in here is almost certainly going to fall by the wayside. So there's no point in even saying it. Hence, trying to be very neat about what you put into the top bit of this pyramid. So concentrate on this bit and this bit. If they want more filling, give it to them afterwards. So those are some of the real basics for me about how to formulate a simple, powerful message. And it shouldn't take more than a few minutes for you to get your head around this, because you know what you want. For the most part, it's stripping away the bits that you just don't need, that are going to relegate what you had to say in this terrible nether region here, which will not be remembered. Okay, so much for actually formulating the message. But how do I get it to be more powerful? I said in the advertisement for this webinar that you can actually change the power setting of the message. And I want to show you how you can do this. And you might have already picked it up in some of the things that I've said. Now, what we actually do to alter the power is to change the words that we use to describe our feelings. I couldn't think of very many a few seconds ago, but here are some that I've prepared earlier, as they say. So if I'm trying to show that I'm keen to do something, or I'm pleased that something has worked and I want to do more, then these are the sorts of emotions that I use. Now, what's interesting is in the more powerful emotions, it's not just negative ones, but also important positive, like enthusiastic, thrilled, frustrated, well, obviously, and delighted. Now, of course, the ones that tend to act as the strongest drivers are frustrated, worried, I'm missing here, annoyed, angry. So these we can use them to calibrate what we're saying. It tells the other person how strongly we need them to listen to us, because this is what's going on for us inside. So as I said before, it's how I feel, what about why? I'm worried that our cybersecurity system isn't up to scratch. I want to make our network secure, and I need to talk to you about it. I need to win you over to this point of view. So that's how to structure that message before you've walked in the room. And that's how to alter the power setting. Okay, so that's the power setting. Now to decide a little bit about who and when and where. Having got those two things sorted out, you need to really think about who you're really approaching. Are they the real person? Now, it could be your boss, but it could also be somebody else's boss, somebody still higher up than you in the food chain. But think about who else is going to get a say in the decision that you're asking your boss or a boss to make. And it may be that you need to win somebody else over first. For example, and this is a classic one, which actually involves HR. And what often happens is that when somebody wants to get rid of somebody, they immediately go to the boss and say, by the way, I'm getting rid of Jane, she's totally useless. And the boss says, yeah, go ahead, just let HR know before you do it, or sometimes after. In that case, rather than going straight to my CEO or the CFO or whoever's my boss, I go to HR first, because I know that I need A, to do it right, and B, to get their backup, to get their support, not to get their backup, to get their backup and their support. But sometimes we need to scan around and really think, who do I need to have this conversation with? Is my direct boss the best one, or is there another boss around? In which case, you need to tell two people. But what I'm saying is that just have a think about who this is really meant for. It might not be the most obvious person. Okay, so you've identified the person. You've decided what you're going to say. You've decided, what's at the top of the pyramid. What are you trying to make happen? The output. What is, you've figured out what I want to do is get this decision. What I want to do is to, make this happen. And you've structured your opening gambit in that way. And incidentally, you're also going to need that to even be able to ask for the meeting. So you know what and you know who. But what about the when? Very often, people go into conversations thinking that because they've got all those other things lined up, which is fantastic and essential, They can just roll into somebody's office or bump into them in the queue for the coffee machine or at lunch and just drop the thing in. Most often what we do, and what I hear people doing when I'm preparing them, when I'm coaching them for a situation, I'll say, okay, so when are you actually going to have this conversation with John or Jane, the CFO, the chairman, the whoever? They'll say, well, we've got a meeting tomorrow about budgets. So what I'll do is we'll do the budgets thing, and then at the end I'll say, look, I need to talk to you about blah blah. So if we do that, what we risk is actually making it sound like it's an offhand, unplanned, not terribly important deal. And already we're downgrading our really carefully prepared message. So think about the last time that you had a message to transfer, and think about when you engineered and in what situation you decided to sort of slip the message in, and think about how well it worked for you or not. And I'd be willing to bet that even if it did work, you probably had to work rather hard to get the person or the people to sit up and listen when their heads were full of something else. And that's the worry that I have, is if I don't create a special moment, then it's going to be very difficult for me to really, really get the person to pay attention, because they might be tired, they might be distracted, their heads will be full of something else, and I don't want to take that chance. So what we do for so many other things in our lives is to create special moments. We have special places to do things. And what I'm suggesting you experiment with is creating a special time and place for the conversation that you've thought so hard about strategizing and preparing for. We go to special places for football matches, for the theatre, to pray and worship. We go to special places to eat. We go to people's houses. There are certain rituals and places and times which get us prepared for something important. And I think we can do this in a work situation. We can just think about, I suppose you could call it, it's a type of stage management. Even if it's just a few moments before. Where do I do this? Do I do this in the cubicle? Do I do this in another meeting room? Do I invite the person for a cup of coffee, or do I invite them to lunch? Or do I say that I want to come and see them in their office? But that context, that special moment, will greatly boost your chances of being taken seriously, of the other person fitting in with the ritual that you want to create of saying something important, and saying important things to people, especially whose time is very precious. The ritual of that is as important as the message. Okay, so you've got all that sorted out. You've figured out who, what, where, and when. But even then, you might hesitate, and many people do. There's a person I've been speaking to who's actually thinking of having a conversation, and now they've been worried about doing it. And actually, to be honest, until yesterday, I didn't actually realize that they were worried about it. And this has been going on for months, and it was just a conversation we had yesterday. It was a project update, and I suddenly realized that who I thought was this incredibly brave CEO who's been in his business for, gosh, 20 years, extremely highly qualified, and this person was hesitating, was wondering what the consequences would be. He was worried about the other person's reaction. And so sometimes the thing that's putting us off isn't so much the message, although that's often enough, especially if it's a tough message, but it's, well, I wonder what will happen next. Is this all going to blow up in my face? So knowing that we have something that we can do if it does all blow up is important. Having a comfortable, well-worn strategy for handling whatever comes next is going to be an important confidence booster, which helps us to actually have that conversation. So this is almost, in a rather strange way, the most important bit of all, knowing what to do next when we've actually said the few sentences that we have which begin that important conversation. The most powerful thing I have come across in all the years that I've been in this business, and it still astonishes me now at one, how amazing it is when I do it, when I remember to, and two, the effects that other people get when they do it, and I suppose three, how rarely we do this. And that is, of course, to listen. We often spend a lot of time, as we have this morning for the last 25 or so minutes, I've been talking to you, explaining to you how to prepare to speak, how to really refine your message, mention your emotions, find a place to do it, make sure you're talking to the right person. But this business about preparing to listen is at least as important as all that. And there is a particular mechanism which I want to show you. If you've been hanging around me for a while, you'll know this, but nevertheless, it's one that's worth a reminder. If you haven't come across this before, then you may be intrigued by the results, and I would really heartily encourage you to go away and experiment with this in any situation. Small situations are good, but anyway, we can come back to that. Okay, so here is how we encourage people to listen to each other. Now, particularly when something big has been said and we're trying to either figure out if something has landed right, or we're handling a reaction that has happened so that we can continue the conversation to a positive, specific conclusion. So here's the drill. We've just said what we needed to say, and this is what happens next. We're looking for the reaction. We're looking for certain clues and data. Let's call it data. And here are the three things that we're actually looking for. So the first type of data we're looking out for in the other person, in their reaction, is how they feel. Are they surprised? Are they turned off? Are they shocked? Are they worried? Are they skeptical? Or are they pleased, enthusiastic, and keen? How do they feel? The second thing, the second kind of data I'm looking out for is, what is that feeling about? What is it that I've just said or described or done that they're having that feeling about? So let me give you some examples. You seem surprised that I'm suggesting that we change the remuneration policy. You seem worried that I'm suggesting that we tell the board that we want to change our minds on our strategy. Okay. And the third bit of data that I'm looking out for constantly is why. Why might she or he be feeling that way about that thing? You seem worried about me suggesting that we go and speak to the board about doing a U-turn on the decision. I guess that's because you think we'll lose credibility. You seem worried about going to the rest of the executive team and suggesting that we don't have the usual bonus this year. I imagine because you anticipate a riot, especially from John and Jane. And then what I do at the end of that, so those are the bits of data, and that's how I reflect them back. That's the sort of language that I encourage you to use, or at least to experiment with. It's actually a statement. It's not asking people how they're feeling. It's actually reflecting back. Just as this dish does, it actually reflects back what's going on, what we see. They can then tell us whether we're correct or which bits we got wrong, and in which case we just give them the correct version again, and we just summarize it differently. So this takes practice. I have shown you something that normally, if we're working with a group or will take a day. to really get it in. But there's absolutely no reason why you can't go away and have a play with this. It'll be on the cheat sheet. It'll also be in the 2-minute model, I would think, that comes out afterwards. But please do ask me about this. If you like the sound of it, but you think, crikey, that's a tall order, then ask away at it, and just practice. Just at the end here, you probably notice this is a little pause here. But anyway, that's how to reflect back what you've heard. All right. So hopefully having that up your sleeve will encourage you in time to actually have those conversations and to not put them off. Notwithstanding this, even if you don't feel comfortable doing this without some practice first, putting conversations off, just as my senior guy, my CEO, kept on putting something off, well, it just means that you have to do it another day. So even if you haven't totally got the hang of this, it's actually a lot better than putting that conversation off. Okay, so here we go. Here is the grand summary before we stop for questions in a couple of minutes' time. So firstly, this is all about outcomes. This is all about what happens. That's the sort of language you need to use with people, not the process, not the drudgery. Go and put your shoes on. I need to ask you a favor. Can we have a chat about budgets? That is going to be such a huge turnoff just at a purely human level that it is unlikely that you'll get any further. You might not even get the conversation you want. The second thing is that we really need to make it as powerful as we need to. It doesn't have to knock the person over the head, but it does have to give a certain level of message, a certain strength of message, and that's done by describing how we feel. And that's all in the top of that little pyramid, which helps us to refine what we want. And it's also simple. It's about a very simple what. And again, the what is output based, not input based. It's all about the outcome. And then there's this business about creating a special moment, even if it's just a few minutes before. Say, where do I do it? Where am I going to stage this conversation? If I have a casual conversation, a by the way, or have you got a sec, then I know I'm throwing away my best chances of success. So make an effort to stage this conversation properly. And lastly, and this might be your actual encouragement for being able to have this conversation in the first place, remember to reflect back what you're seeing. It's so important for your own reassurance to know if the thing has landed, and it's also important for the other person to know that they've been heard. You're trying to get yourself taken seriously, and if you are prepared to take the other person's reaction seriously as well by reflecting back in a mirror what you've seen and heard, then you've got the makings of a real conversation, what we call a real conversation, where the most important things get said out loud rather than just thought and felt. So that's what I have for you this morning. So let's open up the lines. I'm going to now have a look. I'm just going to see what questions there are, if any there. And there's one comment here from David I'm just going to read. I understand we're trying to change people's minds, but do you not think that we're pandering to them in so much that I want to have a chat can't mean I want to have a chat? It's what people assume you want from the words, not the words themselves. So I think, David, what you're saying is, why should I really go to the whole palaver of setting it up so carefully? Surely people should be able to understand it. They should get the hint. Am I right, David? Maybe just yeah, great. Okay. Yes, they should get the hint. You're absolutely right. I suppose what I'm saying, and many people will, but if I'm trying to get a particular message to land, I don't want to leave it to chance for them to get the hint. I want them to really get it square between the eyes. I want them to, yeah, I suppose I don't trust myself or them to not lose the message. So you're right on one hand, David. Yes, they should get the hint, but I'd rather line it up for a much higher chance of success. Okay, does anybody else have, yes, so Tony here has something for us. I'm just gonna, you talk about mind reading people's feelings. Could that backfire if you get it wrong? That's a really cracking question, Tony. A lot of people have that reaction. They say, oh my gosh, that sounds like it's a really dangerous thing to do. Mind reading, am I not intruding on someone's personal thoughts and feelings? Isn't it a really chancy thing to do? It could really wind the other person up. My impression and my experience is that people, well, here's the facts of it, and then I'll tell you how it tends to play out. The facts of it is that when we're having feelings, whether we're at home or at work, people can see them anyway. They're there for all to see. So it doesn't take a psychic or a mind reader to be able to see when, Tony, when you're worried, frustrated, pleased. And so pointing out something that is already evident to you, you know it because you're having the feeling, and it's evident to me because I'm standing here before you and I'm a relatively insightful human being, it's not a big deal. In fact, and here comes to my experience, what I find and have for many years, and people do, so please go and test this one out, Tony, is that people don't even notice you've done it. You don't even need to use the word feel. You know, it's a question, and that is something we can just drop in. You don't seem very happy. You seem skeptical. You seem pleased. People just don't register it. All they hear is the emotion that they're having named for them, and they say, yes, that's right. That's exactly how I'm feeling. Ace. So most of the time, people will notice the effect. In other words, they feel good at having been heard, but they won't notice what you did to have that effect on them. Was that good enough for Tony? Okay, I'm just going to come. I guess I'm used to putting back their words, not mine. Well, you are putting their words back, also their feelings. So it's actually theirs, but you're putting words to them. We'll come back to that one if you want to, Tony. I'm keen to bottom it out if you're not completely satisfied. Okay, one here from Sophia. How do you manage a boss that doesn't stick to meeting times, i.e. pushes it back to the end of the day, thus limiting the time available, and sometimes means rushing through multiple points? Ooh, good one. Okay. Well, my immediate reaction, well, there's two reactions I'm having. One is to give him the feedback, if you dare. I don't think it's a big one it is obviously a big one because otherwise you would have done it, Sophia. So I don't mean to disparage the point, but I think giving somebody feedback that, you know, I can imagine saying, Sophia, I'm going to pretend your boss is called John. John, I've got this really, I've got something important that I want you to make a decision on, but I'm worried that if we push it to the end, if we put it to the end of the day, you won't have time to think about it. So I think I'd probably have a go at giving him some feedback up front about what you're worried about. In other words, running out of time. My second reaction to your thought, Sophia, is that actually having lots of different points is counter to your aim. And sometimes maybe, even though you might have a really hard time even getting airtime with your boss, it might be that you're going to have to ration yourself and say, if I just manage to discuss this one thing with him, or get this one decision, or get this one piece of commitment, or to change his mind on one thing, this is going to be it. Okay, I'm hoping that's okay for you, Sophia. We can come back in a second. I've just been reminded by Nicola that I owe you a poll, so let's just do that final poll before some of you need to escape. Okay, so where are you now? Just before you go, I now have a successful routine for getting my boss to pay attention to my input. Make your selection. Where are you now? And there we go. Okay, this is what the results look like. Share results. And a big increase in the number of people who really think they have a go-to strategy now, and or who will be able to get through more often, which is terrific. I'm really, really pleased. It's been a pleasure having you on board this morning and having this chat. I'd love to discuss more. The next one is about anger, how to handle ourselves when we're really annoyed about something and we're trying to make something happen in the organization, and we get into a routine where we're being seen as the angry troublemaker. And that has been suggested by a lady in the United States who runs a fantastic movement for corporate rebels. And she has started this whole thing. Her name is Lois, and we're hooking up to do a bit of work together in the US. And she said often rebels get very fed up and frustrated, and when it shows, it sometimes spoils the message. And so we're running a webinar on that one and doing the whole 2-minute model and so on and so forth. So join us 28th of August, Friday 28th of August. Have a terrific weekend. If you need to dash off, I'll stay if you can stay. Okay, I'm now going to just check the Q&A to see if there are unanswered questions, which I know there. I did sort of half did some things, so I'm just going to come back to them now. One here from Frank. I hope you're still here, Frank. And this one, oh yes, he is. Frank, to get to the top, you usually develop a pretty good poker face. How do you deal with people who are very difficult to read? That is a terrific question. Well, what you can do is actually tell them that you're having a really difficult time reading them. So it might be to give them feedback to say, I'm really struggling to read the expression on your face, or I'm starting to get worried because I can't tell how you are feeling right now, or how you've reacted to my idea. So port of call number one is to give them feedback and let them explain themselves. Port of call number two, which is often great fun and is worth experimenting with, is just to take a punt. Frank, you may be a lot more insightful than you think, so use your intuition. You've been around the block a few times, I imagine. Just take a punt, and you may well then give that person permission to actually be a lot more open with you. So hopefully that's good enough, Frank. A couple of possibilities: take a punt or give some feedback. David says, how do we deal with people who don't conform to standard management practice, i.e. the boss I'm having trouble with does not seem to understand the basic ideas of people management? Ouch. He has 40 to 50 under his command, and it is a command, yet no one below him trusts him or the way he will react to any given request. How do I approach him and have this chat about the way he deals with people? Now, that's a big, meaty one there, David. I'm assuming that in some way you have the remit. He may be your boss, you may be head of HR or therefore a peer. I tell you what, do you want to, can we free up, David, do you want to say something about this one? Because this is a really interesting one. So let's say if David, unfortunately, oh yes, he is here. Are you able to speak, David?
Yeah, I can speak. Can you hear me?
Yeah, indeed. I'll just turn my volume up a little bit. Okay, go for it.
Yeah, I have a station commander who, for want of a better word, his reaction and the way he deals with people is very. He's like Jekyll and Hyde. You never know where you're going to get with him. You never know what you're going to get with him. And he has managed to alienate everybody below him in the command structure.
Wow.
And I'm just new to the station, but I'm just junior to him. And I do not like the way he speaks to me. And I need to deal with this now. I can't fall into this pattern that everybody else has fallen into. And I need to know how to approach him.
How come you say with great conviction, David, you can't fall into it? How come you can't fall into it? Why not just melt into the background and give yourself an easy life?
Because it's wrong. I don't accept that he should talk and deal with people like that. And he has good ideas. he has the right idea. It's his approach that is making everybody else's life difficult and my life difficult.
So you like the ideas and you think, yeah, this guy, gosh, he's got some terrific stuff, but the way he talks to me really stinks.
Yeah, that's exactly it. His management skills, the way he wants people, he's constantly telling people, I know all the tricks, I know you lot are all slacking off. And my thought is, you don't know any of us. You haven't got a clue. Stop making assumptions.
So I like something that you said a few moments ago, David, when you said, I need to tell him that I don't like the way, I'm new, but I really don't like the way that he talks to me, and I'm not prepared to fall into line like everybody else on the station. And you made me imagine if I was pretending to be him for a few seconds as you were saying that, and I was thinking, what? David could just say that.
Sorry, I missed the end of that.
So you could just say that the way you prepared it for me, the way you reported it, and this is very often the case when we think things in our head. I really should tell him that I'm annoyed with him speaking to me like that because blah. You think, oh, actually, that's what I need to say. For you, David, though, it sounds like there's a weighing up act. There's your own feelings and your own standards and ethics to say this is just wrong on one hand, and you're going to have a very hard time standing that for any length of time if you just let it ride. You can't let it ride. You're going to be very unhappy. And I guess you're weighing that up with the risk that he's going to take punitive action against you in some way.
Yeah. And that's the balancing act, isn't it, really? I mean, on one day I might get him and he may listen, and on another day he might just blow his stack at me. And it's, how do you deal with that? How do you, right, okay, I want to progress this forward. I want to make some ground here. I want to listen to him and understand him and know where he's coming from and how he gets from his point A, B, C to D, how he makes his decisions so that then I can manage him, for want of a better word.
And what you've just said there, David, is also cracking stuff. So imagine you're him now, I'm you. Look, I just want to understand where you're coming from.
Yeah,
and that's why I'm telling you this. I just want to understand, John, Pete, Dave.
Okay, so then
I think there is an inherent risk. I think you're stuck with some risk, David. The counterbalance to that is that you're going to feel so wretched and angry, it's probably going to show anyway.
That's a good point also, yes.
So eventually you're going to leak like a sieve.
So I'll just need to have the conversation then.
The sooner the better, because you're new and you haven't yet fallen into that way, and he doesn't know what to expect from you either.
No, I have arranged a meeting to have a conversation with him based on, I'm new to the section, I'm new to the station, I'd like to know what your standards are, your levels and all that kind of stuff.
Wow, that sounds ideal. It sounds like you've set it up perfectly.
So, but I'm concerned, as you say, that I'm going to step forward and say, well, to be honest, I don't accept you speaking because I've already had him speak to me like this. And it was, for want of a better word, a complete turn-off, a complete downer. I'm introduced
and that's the bit to tell him, David. It's to tell him that it's a real downer and a turn-off rather than I don't accept. I don't accept sounds like a very fancy thing to say, but the more powerful thing to say is it really turned me off.
Yeah, it doesn't inspire me to do my best for him.
There we go. I'd buy that if I was him.
Okay, so I'll try and use that then. Thank you very much, Paul.
That's a great pleasure, David. Good luck.
Cheers.
I think that's got everybody covered. I don't see any others. So fantastic. Thank you so much for joining again, and look forward to seeing you in August. And so we'll take a break in July. If you're going on holiday, have a fantastic time. Keep the questions coming. If you want to get in touch with a title for another webinar, please do. And we'll be in touch shortly with the edited version of this webinar and the 2-minute model a little bit later on in the month or early July. All right, bye for now. Thanks for joining.